How do we get into heaven? That's the question I want to address today. How do we get into heaven? It seems like a good question to ask on All Saints' Day, since we're thinking of people who have passed on, who we hope are in heaven, and I suspect everyone in this room would like to also go to heaven. The funny thing is that although we all think of heaven as the end goal of this faith, that's where we want to end up, if you look at the Bible and you ask, what is heaven like, it gets pretty sketchy. Jesus doesn't go into much detail about what heaven is actually like. He says some vague things about, there's many mansions in heaven and I'm going there to prepare them for you. In the book of Revelation, it's sketched out more. It sounds like it's like a royal court with God on a throne and angels and martyrs all singing around God. And it sounds like eventually there'll be a city of heaven that comes down onto earth that will have lovely fountains and trees and boulevards. But what you'd actually do in heaven, like day to day, is utterly unclear. Is it like being on a cruise ship drinking Mai Tais all day long? Unclear. Is it the place with the best room service ever? Totally unclear. The Talking Heads wrote a song about heaven a couple of decades ago where they said, heaven is a place where nothing ever happens. Okay, that doesn't sound too attractive. More recently, though, popular culture has become more interested in heaven. There was a really nice series that just concluded about a year ago called The Good Place, that some of you may have watched. The Good Place was the story of four rather selfish people, not evil people, but just really selfish, self-absorbed, who spend thousands of years trying to figure out a way to get into heaven. And any time the show shows heaven, it seems to be full of bureaucrats and judges. Basically, heaven is about the bureaucracy which is needed to figure out who's going to be allowed into heaven, and not much else. And then there's another series which has come out more recently on Amazon called Good Omens. Has anybody seen that? Nope? Okay. Not a lot of Amazon TV fans here. Well, it's based on a Neil Gaiman novel. And in Good Omens, it's a story of a demon and an angel who get together and try to make things work. But anytime it shows what heaven looks like, it looks like this. It's like a gleaming corporate office, maybe like one of Apple's offices. And it's disconcertingly empty. There don't seem to be a lot of people in heaven, which is a little bothersome. But there's a lot of worrying about who's going to come into heaven. So popular culture has been trying to think about heaven and what it looks like. And this idea of what is heaven, and if we get there, what's it going to be like, has been on people's minds for a long time. Way back at the beginning of this faith, with early Christianity, they assumed that before Jesus arrived, heaven was closed for business. Nobody who died got into heaven. The vault of heaven was closed. That's why when Jesus is baptized, the wording says, the vault of heaven opened and the Holy Spirit came down. Because the idea was that nobody had been going to heaven. Instead, they'd been ending up in the other place, hell. But they didn't think that hell was a place of punishment, but rather just of eternal boredom. Basically, you died, you went into the underworld, and then you were just bored out of your mind for the rest of time. But when Jesus arrived, they believed, and this is in the Bible, that on the Saturday after Good Friday, after Jesus was being crucified, he went down to hell to open the gates of hell so that people could come up to heaven. And here's a painting that depicts it. This is from the Middle Ages. So you can see that Jesus is standing on some doors. And can we just turn off the subtitles for a second? Jesus is standing on the devil, who has been guarding the gates to hell and keeping everybody inside. Jesus has broken down the doors, and now he's preaching the good news to everyone who ever died before Jesus died. And the two people in front, that old man with the long white beard and the woman right behind him, that's Adam and Eve. So we're really going right back to the beginning. Everybody who ever died was now given a chance to go into heaven by virtue of having heard the good news from Jesus and accepted it. On that day, it was a good day to get into heaven. It was real easy. Just say, wow, Jesus, fabulous, yes, and oof, up you go. But if you were to ask the Catholic Church after that, how do you get into heaven? Well, then it gets trickier. All through the Middle Ages, the Roman Catholic Church taught that if you wanted to get into heaven, you needed to be a good person, and obviously be a Christian, but you also needed to do good things, do good works. Problem was that if you lived in the Middle Ages, death could come very suddenly. Half of the population would die before the age of 20. Infant mortality rates were sky high. Diseases which we have vaccinations for now regularly killed people. So people often went to their graves without having had maybe enough time to do those charitable works they always meant to do and which the church would like you to do. So how do you fix this? Well, the Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church, came up with an ingenious solution. They said, you know what? If you give us money so that we can hire monks and priests to pray for your dead loved one, we can speed up the time with which they get into heaven. We can actually get them reserved seats into heaven if you give us money. These were called indulgences. And a lot of those great cathedrals in Europe were built with money from this clever fundraising / theological scheme. On or about October 31st, 1517, one Martin Luther said, "That is ridiculous." He tapped up those famous theses on a door at the Wittenberg University, and he said, "That's ridiculous. It can't be up to the church to decide who goes into heaven. Only God could decide that. How did the church become the authority figure here? It must be up to God." But then that raised the question, how do you get into heaven? And Luther had an answer. He said, it's not good works that gets you into heaven. It's good faith. You need to accept Jesus as your Messiah, to really take him on board, believe in Jesus and his saving power. Then, hopefully out of that, you will become a good person and you will do good works. But faith comes first. So good faith first. Okay, so let's say it's 1517 and you have been going to Catholic Church for your entire life. Catholic Church consists of doing the Mass, and the whole thing is in Latin. Who is this Jesus guy? You don't actually know Jesus very well at this point, and how could you? So Luther did another revolutionary thing, and this is really what kicks off the Reformation. He says, I'm going to translate the Bible into a language you can understand. So Luther hives off into a castle and spends time translating the New Testament into German. This was illegal at the time. Others followed. It got translated into French and English and all the other common languages. And now there's hundreds and hundreds of languages that have the Bible translated. There's a new Mohawk translation which just came out. Once people could read the Bible, then they could get to know Jesus. And Luther's assumption was, if you read the New Testament and you meet the Prince of Peace, you will be transformed. Your faith will become real. Not just a promise, but you will actually feel it. Okay, spin forward 500 years to our time. Very few people read that book. Biblical literacy is quite low. Very few people read the Bible every day. And yet, polls of Canadians show that 57% of all Canadians believe in heaven and would like to go there. Even if they're not going to church much, they don't read the Bible much, they would still like to go to heaven. Okay, so how do you get there? It's become commonplace among secular people as well as Christians to think that heaven is a place that we go after we die. It obviously exists for people who have already passed on, but for you, you're going to get to heaven when you die. That's just the way we look at it. But the interesting thing is, if you listen to what Jesus says about heaven in the Bible that Luther wanted us to read, he says, yeah, sure, heaven is a place that you'll go to when you die, but that's not the most important part of heaven at all. And we can hear that in the Beatitudes today. In the Beatitudes, it's the prelude to the Sermon on the Mount. So Jesus has been with his disciples not very long. It's the 5th chapter in the Gospel of Matthew. He's just been choosing disciples. He's been doing some miracles. The word's out. This guy's an amazing preacher, and he can heal you of your sicknesses and your paralysis, and he can even exorcise demons. So people gather at the bottom of, at the Sea of Galilee, and they want to get healed and they want to be taught. We've all been there. So they want to be taught, and he decides he's going to go up the mountain with his disciples first and talk to them a little bit. So he sits down with them, and he gives what is known as the Sermon on the Mount. But he starts with the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. And he goes down this list of all these blessed people. Blessed are parents who have children who don't behave in church. We have all been there. There is no shame there. So he goes through all these blessings. But what's interesting about the blessings is that all of them are in the present tense. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who mourn. Not that they will be blessed at the end when they meet their judge in the afterlife, but they're blessed right now. And this makes sense, because when Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven in other parts of the New Testament, he often talks about it as though it's right here, right now. He says in the Gospel of Luke, the kingdom of heaven is within you. I can't get any closer than that if it's within you. He uses parables to try and explain what the kingdom of heaven is like. It's like a mustard seed. It's planted in the ground, the smallest of seeds, and yet it grows into this beautiful big bush that the birds of the air alight on. Well, that's something that sounds very, very earthly and concrete. Doesn't sound like something that's happening at the end of the world. It's happening right now. And he also says, the kingdom of heaven is among you anytime he's sitting with people. He's saying, if you're with me right now, I'm so close to God, you are in the presence of the kingdom of heaven right now. He's not being egotistical about this. He's just trying to say, heaven is here all the time. Our problem is that we don't recognize it. The Apostle Paul spoke about this problem when he said that we see through a glass darkly now, but later we will see clearly. It's as though there's grime on a window, and so we can barely see the heaven that's all around us, but eventually when we die, that grime will be cleared off and we'll be able to see clearly. A more modern metaphor would be one that was supplied by Hermann Hesse, the German novelist who wrote the novel Steppenwolf. And in that novel, near the end, he says that eternity in God's realm is like a radio station that you can barely pick up. And we're the radio receiver. So if you think of yourself as a transistor radio, you know, when you're trying to tune in stations, especially late at night, sometimes you'll faintly hear a station, but there's lots of crackling and it doesn't quite come in right. That's what heaven is like. Heaven is a beautiful signal, which is always around us, but we're not very good radios, so we can't tune it in very well. Okay, so that raises the question, how do you get better reception for heaven? How do you actually feel the presence of heaven more? Well, Jesus talks about this. Pray, fast, calm down. Try and wipe the grime off of your glass. I would add now, meditate. Meditation's a great way to calm right down. And I suspect that all of you have had moments where you felt like you're in the presence of the kingdom of heaven. Those moments where it's just like, yeah. Often in nature. You know, you ask people, when do you feel closest to God? They'll often say, when I'm outside in nature. Children seem to have a kind of childlike wonder at the world. I overheard a mother and child walking down the street this week, and they were just marveling at the ways the trees had changed color. Hey, there's an orange one, Mom, and there's a yellow one. And, oh, that one's red. It was like they'd never seen a tree before. That sort of mindset, where you can just put aside all of your worries and distractions and your ego and just marvel at things the way they are, that's what it's like when you're perceiving the kingdom of heaven around you. Now, you may object, you know what? Like, I don't experience moments of bliss very often. That's not my life. And that's okay. Because remember, in that list of blesseds, there's no blessed are the blissed out. That's not actually a requirement here. You don't have to be walking around in a state of eternal bliss. It's fine. You don't have to be a mystic. And in fact, what's interesting about the way Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven is that Jesus is certain that the kingdom of heaven is near all the time. What Jesus wants is for the kingdom of heaven to become really, really obvious to you and to other people. He wants everybody to feel the presence of the kingdom of heaven. And some of the ways in which we do that, it's not going to lead to bliss, because on that list of people who are blessed are peacemakers, the merciful, and those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Right? People who are being persecuted are not feeling blissful. That's not how that works. And peacemakers, imagine the poor peacemakers who are eventually going to have to get the Israelis and the Hamas at the same table, if Hamas still exists. That is not going to be an easy situation. No one's going to be feeling blissful at that table. But if peace can break out and be sustained, that's the kingdom of heaven drawing near, becoming more obvious. So Jesus is saying, you don't have to be blissed out. You don't have to be feeling light of heart all the time. But if you can help someone else draw closer to the kingdom of heaven in this life, that is extraordinarily worthwhile. When I talk to people who have experienced homelessness over the years, one of the things they've told me is that when they're outside begging for money, what's most worthwhile to them is not the money that gets put in the hat, but the people who stop to talk to them and treat them like real human beings. That's what they most crave. Because in our society, we look upon people who experience homelessness as being the worst class of citizen. They're sort of everybody else's nightmare. And so when someone stops and kneels down and just says, "How you doing? How's your day going?" and just treat them like a regular human being, that is the kingdom of heaven drawing near. In September, we hosted a baby shower for 24 African refugee moms. It was a fabulous day. We provided the space. It was other people who did the work in terms of making the whole event happen. The Queens of Durham, as well as some other black women's organizations, did all the work. But they needed to have the moms transported here because, of course, they didn't have cars. So some of us from this congregation and other volunteers hopped into our cars, and we went to the various shelters and churches where the African women were staying. And in the car rides, as well as afterwards, I asked a few of them, so why did you choose Canada to be the place where you wanted to seek asylum? Because at this point, right, they had been arriving and sleeping outside on Peter Street, and then a few of the black churches said, yes, we'll take them in, and they did. And I picked up some women from one of those churches. And those churches, like, you know, they didn't even have pews, right? I think I've spoken about this before. It's kind of like a warehouse space, so they were sleeping on mattresses on the floor and on chairs. Not too different from these chairs, just sleeping at night in chairs. Sometimes they'd put them in a row and sleep on them, but, you know, nothing comfortable. So I asked one of the women, why did you choose to come to Canada? And her answer was, because of Canada's reputation for hospitality. I think I groaned audibly when I heard that, because from my perspective, we had failed so completely. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I mean, it's supposed to be better than this. She said, oh, no. The church where I am staying has pulled out all the stops to help us. You know, they're not a hostel, and yet they've become a hostel for us. They brought out everything that they can, their chairs. They've been extremely hospitable. This is an example of Canadian hospitality. For that lady, she was feeling that the kingdom of heaven had drawn near because of the hospitality that had been shown by that church. And she said, look at what you guys are doing today. This is wonderful. And they went home with a lot of stuff, like a lot of baby stuff. It was wonderful. So you never know, even though you're not feeling that the kingdom of heaven is happening for you, through your actions, you may make the kingdom of heaven draw near for somebody else. And you'll notice in the list of those blesseds, it doesn't say, blessed are those who accept Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. It's not in that list. Blessed are the meek, blessed are the merciful, blessed are peacemakers, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the poor in spirit. All sorts of different categories of people who you can find in any faith, and even among people with no faith. Good human beings who are doing loving things and perceive the world in a state of wonder from time to time and make an effort to help other people feel that the world is a wondrous and caring place. Those people are all blessed, whether they've got faith or not. So perhaps the question, how do we get into heaven, is the wrong question. Perhaps the right question is, how do we remember that heaven is all around us all the time? And how do we find our way there more often for ourselves and others? Because if we can do that, we will feel blessed, and we can be a blessing to the world around us. Amen.